Hello and welcome once again to the DCL podcast. My name's Steve Creasy, your host, inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly. Well, welcome once again to the DCL podcast. Again, my name's Steve Creasy, and I'll be your host for the show. Pretty excited to finally get this project underway and start kicking off episode 1 here on the podcast. As stated in the first intro podcast, just a quick background again on the show, what I'm hoping to do with it. DCL podcast is going to center around the Disney Cruise Line, and that's going to be our home port. However, once again, as I stated earlier in the first podcast, kind of the way I envision it is we're going to always be talking and centered around Disney Cruise Line. However, we're going to talk about all different kinds of aspects in the preparing to travel for a cruise or just changes in the travel industry in general. Also, one of the things that I'd really like to touch on is history, and that's what this first episode is going to be about. We're going to go back and take a look at the Big Red Boat. But before I jump into the history portion, which is going to be our main portion of the podcast, kind of an exciting day today. DCL announced their early 2018 ports and itineraries, so kind of a insight into what's going to be going on in 2018. I kind of think I'll try and touch base on maybe some of the big changes or things, or my thoughts on some of the big changes as they come up from show to show, but don't really envision this show as being a breaking news show whatsoever as far as Disney Cruise Line goes. There's a lot of other avenues for that. The Disney Cruise Line blog is one of the ones that I look at quite a bit, along with Disney Parks blog, to take a look at what's going on at DCL and just with the Disney company in general. So taking a look at the where they're going to be going in 2018, just a couple initial thoughts. It's kind of neat to see that they're going to be heading down to the Southern Caribbean into a new port, Bonaire. It's a place that I actually have never been to before, but looking at some of the pictures that they've put online here on the Disney Parks blog, looks like kind of an exciting place to go, where they talk about some of the different things you can do there, especially water sports enthusiasts. It looks like it's a great place for scuba diving, snorkeling, windsurfing, and kiteboarding. So Bonaire, look at that for one of your possible new destinations for those of you who like to sail down into the Caribbean. And I believe that most of those are going to be on the Wonder out of San Juan, Puerto Rico, it looks like. Another exciting thing for us out here on the West Coast. Once again, we live up in Oregon, so for us, whenever DCL adds something more to the West Coast or confirms or brings the Wonder back to the West Coast, it's kind of neat to see. Hoping to probably not going to happen this year, but there's a possibility in 2018. We're looking at maybe trying to pop down to San Diego and get on one of the sailings down to Cabo San Lucas or Ensenada. Once again, they have 2, 3, and 5 night sailings down out of San Diego. And that's something I'd like to, a topic I'd love to touch on in a later episode, sailing down to Mexico. I haven't actually done it on a cruise ship, but with my job with an airline, I get an opportunity to go down to Mexico quite a bit. So as far as the Dream and the Fantasy, they're going to be doing, it looks like, kind of their same normal sailings out of Port Canaveral. The Fantasy is going to continue to sail 7-night Eastern and Western Caribbean voyages, while the Dream is going to be sailing 3- and 4-night cruises to Nassau and Castaway Cay. And for those of you who haven't been to Castaway Cay before, like myself, looks like every sailing on the Dream and Fantasy is going to have a stop in Castaway Cay. And finally, that leads us to the Magic, the first ship, and they're going to continue to sail out of Miami on 4- and 5-night voyages to the Bahamas and Western Caribbean cruises. And just kind of a side note, this coming March for spring break, my family and I are going to be traveling down to Walt Disney World for a couple days at Disney World, and then we will be driving down to Miami for a 5-night cruise, our first cruise down to the Caribbean. So look later in March, probably April. I'll get back to you with a trip report on the Magic and sailing out of Miami, and been doing a lot of planning for it right now. So trying to get some good information to those of you who have not sailed out of Miami for getting into and out of the port there. for our family, we're really looking forward to the summer dates in 2018. We're looking at possibly doing a Mediterranean cruise, or that's our plan right now, is to head back to Europe and do a Mediterranean cruise. Well, on into our first episode then. This first episode is going to be about the Big Red Boat. And one of the things that I was really looking forward to when I decided to start a podcast was talking about some of the history behind the ships and behind the DCL, or Disney Cruise Line Company, and also some of the history in the ports that they sail into. And when I really thought about it, I figured we'd just start from the beginning and talk about the Big Red Boat, the first cruise ship that Disney contracted out with. So to kind of frame the story, I thought we'd take a look at why Disney got into the cruise ship industry, or cruise industry, and then we'll actually talk about the ship itself. So let's go back to 1980, approximately 1985. And what was happening then was at Walt Disney World, Epcot had opened, and Michael Eisner, the CEO of Disney at that time, was looking to increase the average length of stays of guests. And they did that by building Epcot, which was a dream of Walt Disney's, and that extra park added on to the days that the average tourist came down and spent at Disney. In addition to that, they began building hotels on property to keep people within the Disney property itself, so that they, rather than having them go off property where they would spend their money in accommodations and food, it kept them on property where, once again, Disney could reap the benefits of those tourists coming down there. Now, meanwhile, at the same time, over in Port Canaveral, that's the closest port to Walt Disney World, there was a small company known Premier Cruise Lines. They were a small player in the cruise industry who was looking to grow, and they decided to take a chance on Port Canaveral rather than trying to build under the stiff competition which was being played out down in Miami with the likes of Carnival, Royal Caribbean, and Norwegian. So Premier Cruise Lines saw families as the highest underserved population in the cruise industry. You know, families weren't a high priority of the cruise industry back in the late 70s and early 80s. So they decided to exploit this niche by building up a presence at Port Canaveral. Well, why Port Canaveral? Well, at that time, nobody else was sailing out of there. And they decided that they looked at the families visiting the Orlando area, and they were specifically thinking of those families visiting Walt Disney World and several of the other theme parks in the Orlando area, and thought that they could capture those families and provide them cruises out to the Bahamas for 3 to 4 days. And that would reach a niche that none of the other major cruise lines were catering to until that point. Also at that time, the Central Florida area was starting to boom in population growth. And their only real opportunity to take a cruise at that point was to travel down to Miami. So Premier thought that if they could build up the Port Canaveral area, that would be a great way for them to grow without facing the stiff competition of the bigger cruise lines down to Miami. Now, at the same time, Eisner saw that by getting into the cruise industry, he could accomplish a couple different things. He also saw cruises as one of the fastest growing vacation alternatives, and that young families remain the least served segment of that market. And he looked at Premier Cruise Lines and what they were doing in Port Canaveral and saw them rapidly building this market. And he envisioned, by working with Premier Cruise Lines and packaging 3 and 4 day cruises along with a 3 and 4 day stay before or after Walt Disney World, he had the potential to nearly double a guest stay and potentially double the income they collected on guests as they came in for their Walt Disney World vacations. So from 1985 to 1993, the Disney company had a contract with Premier Cruise Lines to officially serve as the official cruise line of Disney World. And Premier Cruise Lines used the ship that they nicknamed the Big Red Boat as their primary ship for providing those cruises. So I thought it would be fun to look back at this time period and learn a little bit about the Big Red Boat, whose real name was Oceanic, where she came from, how she came to serve as Disney's quote-unquote first cruise ship, and what happened to her afterwards. First, let's talk a little bit about the life of a cruise ship. The useful life of a ship is frequently longer than the time the general cruising public regards the ship as a viable option for their vacations. As a ship ages, she no longer has the amenities and conveniences that the public expects to find or finds on their competitors. At some point, it becomes financially prohibitive to keep updating a ship, such as the Wonder is currently going through over in Spain. Think about the mega ships which are being launched today by Royal Caribbean and Norwegian. I mean, those ships are twice the size of the Wonder and the Magic, and the amount of themed restaurants and dining areas and water areas and casinos, and they've got indoor bumper cars and ice skating rinks. As those more amenities come on and ships become the destinations themselves, it puts a lot of pressure on the older ships that don't have those amenities to be able to keep up with what the traveling public wants. So today, in a lot of cases, the ship has become the destination. And as we said, touched on, they have numerous specialty restaurants. They have out-of-this-world slides and pools, spaces for Broadway caliber shows, and as we touched about, even bumper cars and skating rinks. At this point, the ship no longer becomes competitive. Those ships that no longer have those amenities, they no longer become competitive, and no money in upgrades is worth spending on it. So the major cruise lines then look to sell these ships to companies that provide cruises on a secondary market at bargain rates, usually outside of the United States, which begs the question, and one Disney will have to answer someday, what will happen to the Magic and the Wonder? I mean, could you imagine the Magic and the Wonder being sold to the secondary market someday? Personally, myself, deep down inside, I think this would make me sad to see such proud ships relegated to a lesser role. And I think it might be at that point best, and this is a total side note, that I don't know. I don't know what Disney would do, if they'd sell it to the secondary market or not. Or I guess probably what I'd like to see maybe done to them is maybe they'd use the steel and scrap from those ships and build the next generation of ships for DCL. From out of the ashes, the Phoenix rises. What better tale is there than the rise of the Phoenix for a company like Disney that excels at telling stories? But I digress a little bit. So that's kind of the life of a cruise ship. You know, eventually it's not going to have the amenities, and no amount of money put into it is going to allow it to keep up with its competitors. But I digress here, and it makes me shudder to think such thoughts about such beautiful ships as the Magic and the Wonder. But that's not the end yet for most ships. After their time in the secondary market, ships often go on to another unique career, and we'll see that the Big Red Boat, or the Oceanic as she was officially named, went on to a definitely unique job before they are finally sold off to the breakers for scrap. So let's learn a little bit about the birth of the Oceanic. Home Lines, an Italian passenger and shipping company that operated ocean liners and cruise ships, had her commission, the Oceanic that is, commissioned to be built. Home Lines was founded in 1946, and it ceased operations in 1988 when it merged with Holland America Lines. And Holland America Lines is actually owned by Royal Caribbean. She was built in 1965 by Cantier, and excuse my Italian here, but Cantier Riuniti del Adriatico in Monfalcone, Italy. Incidentally, it's the same shipbuilder who built the Magic and the Wonder. She was originally built to fill a dual role. Transatlantic crossings between Italy and Canada in the summer, and then in the winter, she would cruise between New York City and the Caribbean and the Bahamas. But in 1965, when she came into service, something no one saw coming began to change the transatlantic passenger service. The Boeing 707 had begun service for several airlines across the Atlantic. With the speed that jet service now offered travelers, crossing the Atlantic in hours instead of days, it quickly rendered the transatlantic service no longer viable. So Home Lines quickly reacted to the collapse in demand for transatlantic service by turning Oceanic into a full-time cruise ship. Now, the good thing about Oceanic was she was blessed with several new features which made her perfect in her new role as a cruise ship sailing out of New York. She had a large swimming pool area with 2 adjacent smaller pools. The pool area was covered by a large glass retractable roof known as a magrodome, which allowed her to cover the pool areas for guests to use as they sailed out of the cold New York area, and then open it when they reached the warmer waters around the Bahamas and the Caribbean. Several Holland America ships still feature these domes today, and when we were in Norway on our cruise this last May, there was actually a Holland America ship that pulled into the port, one of the ports that we pulled into, and we ended up taking a road that went up above the fjord, and you could look down onto the ships, and the Holland America ship was right below us. And you could actually see that dome. It was pretty cool. For those of you who haven't traveled on a Holland America ship before, they're still in use today, or the use of those domes so that they can open and close them in the colder or warmer climates. Also, back to the Oceanic, her steam turbine engines allowed her to drive at speeds of up to 27.25 knots, which was much faster than other cruise ships then, allowing her to travel quickly from the cold New York area down to the sunny south. She was also fully air conditioned, unlike most of the ships during this time period, which allowed passengers to cruise in comfort throughout the steamy Caribbean. Her lifeboats were also positioned lower and closer to the waterline. This had opened up the user decks, making them nicer for passengers to spend time out on the deck areas during the cruise. And finally, she was a large ship for that time period. She was able to accommodate over 1,200 passengers. Well, how does that compare to today's ships? I kind of looked up the Disney, the Magic and the Wonder, and also the Fantasy and the Dream. Well, the Magic and Wonder right now can accommodate up to 2,700 passengers, and they have a crew of approximately 950. So that's over double. The Magic and the Wonder are double the size of what the Oceanic was. And then you start looking at the Fantasy and Dream, they can accommodate up to 4,000 passengers and have a crew of 1,458. So there's actually more crew members on the Fantasy and the Dream than there were the number of passengers on the Oceanic. So it kind of gives you an idea of how big of a ship it was. She operated consistently at 95% capacity while sailing 7-day cruises to the Bahamas and more extended cruises down to the Caribbean for many years. But by 1980, she was no longer a first-tier ship for Homelines. So in 1982, she loses her status as Homeline's flagship when they bought the Atlantic. And that's another ship, the Atlantic, not the Ocean. And after 20 years of proud service for Homelines, she was sold to an up-and-coming cruise line in America known as Premier Cruise Line in 1985. So let's now take a look at Premier Cruise Lines, where they came from, and Oceanic's transition to the Big Red Boat. Premier Cruise Lines was founded in 1983 with the aim of providing 3 to 4 day cruises out of Port Canaveral to the Bahamas. Once again, why Port Canaveral? As we kind of talked about already at the beginning of the show, no major cruise lines were sailing out of Port Canaveral, so initially there would be no competition. Port Canaveral also offered a much shorter drive for a large group of Central Florida residents who were already driving all the way to Miami or Fort Lauderdale to take 3 to 4 day cruises. It allowed them to take vacations easier and more spur of the moment. And probably the biggest reason why they chose Port Canaveral, once again, was with the many theme parks in the Orlando area, especially Walt Disney World, they looked to package 3 to 4 day cruises to the underserved families who were already in town enjoying their vacations in the Orlando area. Now, Premier knew if they were successful up there, the big cruise lines would follow. So they needed a way to differentiate themselves before that happened. And they did this by successfully negotiating with Disney to become the official cruise line of Walt Disney World. Getting those costume Disney characters on board was one of their first steps to attracting families to their product. And then they also made their ships look fun and unique by painting the hulls a deep red, and thus the Big Red Boat was born. So where did Oceanic fit into all of this? Well, Oceanic was the second ship purchased by Premier. After an extensive refit, she entered service in 1985 and was renamed Starship Oceanic, but was marketed under the name the Big Red Boat. The refit transformed her from an elegant ocean liner to more of a mass market style boat to fit the growing demands and tastes of cruise ship travelers of the mid-1980s. She successfully began to introduce a whole generation of people into the style, ease, and joys of cruise ship travel. And what better way to do it than with the friendly Disney characters on board to keep kids and adults entertained as they plied their way back and forth for 3 to 4 days between Port Canaveral and the Bahamas. The success of Premier Cruise Lines out of Port Canaveral eventually led to 2 major problems for them. It led to all the major cruise lines positioning ships out of Port Canaveral. Because these companies were so much larger at the time, better financed, and had newer ships, it would be the beginning of the end for Premier. It also inevitably led to Michael Eisner finally turning his eye on the Big Red Boat and the product they provided for Disney. In the end, after Eisner had taken a cruise with his family on the Big Red Boat, Eisner and Disney became increasingly uneasy not to have control over the cruise product, even though the cruises were very popular at the time with families. As Michael Eisner said in his book, Michael Eisner, Work in Progress, he saw people having fun, but he didn't feel the experience was Disney enough. This led Disney to terminate their contract with Premier in 1993 and eventually build their own cruise line. But that is a story for another podcast. So after Disney terminated their contract with Premier, Premier responded by negotiating with Warner Brothers. They replaced Mickey Mouse with Bugs Bunny and all of the Looney Tunes characters. And for those of you who are a little too young to remember Looney Tunes, some of them were Sylvester the Cat, Tweety Bird, the Roadrunner, and Coyote, and good old Foghorn Leghorn. At the same time, Premier responded to their larger competitors by attempting to expand. They purchased several more secondhand ships, and they began developing cruises out of other U.S. markets and also in Europe. But by the turn of the millennium, Premier had overextended themselves, and they went bankrupt in September of 2000. And our dear ship, Oceanic, the Big Red Boat, was seized by authorities as she entered Freeport in the Bahamas. So what happened to Oceanic then? Well, Premier Cruise Line's demise in September 2000 was coincident with a change in attitude of Europeans towards cruising. Until that point in time, the early 2000s, cruising was seen as an elitist endeavor by most Europeans, something only for the wealthy, royalty, or even film stars. But as in America in the 1970s, Europeans in the early 2000s now began to see cruising as an economical vacation alternative. So after being seized in Freeport, the Big Red Boat was eventually sold to Pulmonator Cruises, a Spanish-based travel company who had sold cruises to their customers on Premier Cruise Lines until Premier's demise. So Pulmonator had already had a relationship with Premier Cruise Lines and with the Big Red Boat. So Premier Cruise Lines goes bankrupt. Pulmonator uses that opportunity to buy the Oceanic and other ships that were being operated by Premier Cruise Lines. So what did Pulmonator do with our ship? Pulmonator reverted the Big Red Boat back to the name Oceanic and repositioned her back to the Mediterranean, where she was then used out of Barcelona, and she spent her remaining years as a cruise ship plying the waters of the Mediterranean. As a fun side note, as Pulmonator Cruises began buying secondhand ships to meet the growing demand of European travel, one famous boat they bought was the MS Pacific Princess in 2002 from Princess Cruises. The Pacific Princess was the ship that helped launch the cruising business in America to where it is today, as she sailed weekly on television as, you guessed it, the Love Boat. But in 2006, Pulmonator was acquired by Royal Caribbean. Pulmonator still exists today as a subsidiary of Royal Caribbean, specializing in cruises throughout Europe and the Mediterranean. During this transition under Royal Caribbean, Oceanic finally outlived her life as a cruise ship. No amount of money could be spent to upgrade her to make her competitive with the newer ships plying the oceans in the late 2000s. So she was finally sold to an organization known as Peaceboat in 2009. Now, Peaceboat's kind of an interesting organization. I did a little research into them. And what Peaceboat is it was an organization founded in 1983, and it's a non-governmental organization, or NGO, based out of Yokohama, Japan. Peaceboat works to raise awareness and build connections internationally among the other NGOs and groups that work for peace, human rights, environmental protection, and sustainable development. They used Oceanic for about 2 worldwide sailings a year, where she served as a floating university. She offered educational opportunities and conferences on board as she sailed around the world. And she also provided humanitarian aid at several of her various stops throughout the Third World. After 3 years making worldly voyages for Peaceboat, she was returned to Pulmonator Cruises in exchange for a newer ship called the Ocean Dream. Oceanic left Yokohama in May of 2012, and I'm going to probably butcher this word too, for Hoshan, China, where she was officially scrapped. She was sent to the breakers and scrapped. And thus we come to the end of the story around the Big Red Boat. Well, I hope you found the story of the Big Red Boat interesting as we look at the lifespan of a cruise ship from beginning to end. Of course, this is just one ship's story. I thought as the Disney Wonder is being reinvented over in Spain, it would be fun to look back at the life of the first ship that offered cruises under the Disney name. With the Wonder's refitting, she will be ready to sail for years to come with you and I as we look toward our future cruises. In preparing for this show, I actually used several different articles to research about the Big Red Boat. The main one I used was by Richard Wagner, and it was titled What Happened to the Big Red Boat. I also got a couple sections out of Michael Eisner's book, A Work in Progress, and a couple articles or some information as well from the Disney Cruise Line website itself. And for those of you interested in cruising history, I'm going to throw this book out. I actually had a chance to read it this summer, and it's written by Christopher Guerin, and it's called Devils on the Deep Blue Sea, The Dreams, Schemes, and Showdowns That Built America's Cruise Ship Empires. It really doesn't touch too much on Disney Cruise Line, but it really has the beginnings of Norwegian, Royal Caribbean, and extensively on Carnival too. So if you're interested in the cruise business and the history of the cruise business, I really recommend this book. You can find it on Amazon, and out here in Oregon, we've got a great bookstore called Powell's Books, Powells, and you can go on their website online and you can find it through them usually, I think. So that's where I picked up my copy. But it's just an incredible book. So if you're into the history behind the cruise lines, this would be one that I would highly recommend. Well, once again, I'd like to thank you for joining me on this first episode of the DCL podcast. If you want to reach out to me between now and the next show, you can follow me on Twitter at DCL Podcast. I've also been working on a Facebook page. Should be launching that here sometime soon. So look for me on Facebook as well, and that's going to be the DCL Podcast on Facebook as well. So once again, I'd like to thank you for joining me, and for those of you who may be heading out sometime in the near future on a future cruise with DCL, I'd like to wish you happy sailing on the high seas, and look forward to you on episode number 2 of the DCL Podcast. Again, my name's Steve Creasy, wishing you happy sailings and a good day.